Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Debate Podcast, episode number 3, discussing topics in Android every single week. I am, of course, your host, Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? And I'm joined by our usual panel. We have Andrew Grush, who is also the architect of the Friday Debate every single week on AndroidAuthority.com. We also have writer Jonathan Feist here, and our app guy on YouTube, Joseph Hindy. How's it going, everybody?
Hello, Internet.
Hello.
Good. Nice. As always, we get together every single week and talk about a particular topic, one that we post on AndroidAuthority.com, on which a lot of our writers give their thoughts upon, and we made it into a podcast form. So we hope you guys have been enjoying the podcast thus far. We are now in our 3rd episode officially, since we did a pilot over in at CES. But last week, we weren't able to record because, well, not the least reasons were I was in China covering a media tour with Huawei, which turned out to be a pretty good time. And you can see those videos. Obviously, I did some very nice vlog style videos, so you can kind of see our experience rather than just watch some canned videos. They really did a great job just sort of bringing us out, and we got to see their campus. So thanks to Huawei out there. But also, it was Super Bowl Sunday on Sunday, and even though we planned on postponing it until then, unfortunately, we all opted for the bad food and watching the game. I wanted to pop this question out there. Did your guys' team win?
I watch hockey.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, did anybody watch? Any of you?
I watched. I wasn't really rooting for any particular team. I just think it's fun to watch Super Bowl.
Oh, okay. So you guys didn't really put down like any bets or anything? Like I knew a couple people who won like $500 in a pool or something. It was amazing.
No,
here's the thing.
Ridiculous.
I just moved to Portland, Oregon, and Seattle is kind of our rival, especially when it comes to the college leagues. And NFL, of course, is a different story. They have the big league team in Seattle, so they're kind of my team. And so yes, my team lost.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. That we don't have to get into it, but I do have to just sort of echo everyone else's frustration over what that last play was. I was like, oh my God, that was the worst call in history. Well, not history, but but in any case, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping and checking in with everybody. Of course, you can find our podcast all over the web. So if you are on YouTube right now watching, where we put it up for you guys' courtesy, for your ears, what you can also do is find us on all the different podcast channels. You can find us on iTunes, on Stitcher. I'm very close to finalizing the SoundCloud channel, but of course you can use the podcast aggregation applications if you want to do it that way, which is one of the best ways to listen to the Friday Debate podcast, actually. So why don't we go ahead and just jump into this week's topic. We're talking about Android One, and if you don't know what that is, we'll go ahead and give you a brief primer on it. But here is our long-form version of the Friday Debate topic that we put up on our site and we're talking about right now. Part of the allure of Android One was that it would bring faster, almost Nexus-like updates to lower-end phones, promising an affordable offering that would still provide a decent Android experience. With the slow update to Lollipop, though, and the fact that the sales numbers are reportedly not all that high, is Android One delivering on that promise? Can Android One be a success? Or, with so many other affordable devices, is it a largely unnecessary program? So we're going to be discussing Android One, its implications on the market, because they're supposed to be low-end phones. But the first thing I wanted to pose to everybody is we're all obviously familiar with Android One, what it was supposed to be able to do. But for just a brief primer about where it was supposed to be going and the reason why maybe us here in the West, like in the US, don't really know too much about it. How about Grushy? Why don't you give us sort of your brief overview of Android One?
Okay, so Android One was never really meant for the West markets. It was meant as a way to bring cheap phones to the next, a billion or whatever, it's 5 billion, whatever they quote, people. And it wasn't so much about cheap phones. It was about creating competitively priced devices that had faster updates. I mean, you have these low-end phones in India, China, throughout Asia, basically, and Africa as well. Anyway, they tend to be stuck with the same version of Android for their entire life cycle. And so the idea was to create something that was maintained by Google. Google would provide the updates, and it would create, basically we'd get phones that had that Nexus-like experience, stock Android, and we wouldn't be stuck with these old versions. So it would provide the best experience possible instead of people getting, something that basically never changes.
Yeah, definitely. And the whole idea that, I mean, updates are always a hot button topic for anybody that uses an Android device. And I think right before our podcast, we had a little bit of a pre-show thing going on, and we were talking about if all of our devices are on Lollipop at this point. Obviously, we're using anywhere between mid to high end phones, but just putting this out there, like let's say Feisty, the devices that you use, are you on Lollipop on the vast majority of them at least?
No, not at all. The majority are still Jelly Bean 442.
Oh wow, Jelly Bean. Okay.
Well, remember,
Sorry,
he uses
Kit
a
Kat.
lot of low-end devices.
Did I say Jelly Bean? I'm sorry, Kit
Yeah,
Kat. I'm
okay, I was about to
I'm
say,
not even paying
Jelly
attention
Beans.
here. Sorry.
I was about to say everyone raised their eyebrows and we're like, wait a minute.
You have a Moto G though, right? So your Moto G should be on Lolly.
Yes, the Moto G is up to date, and of course that right now is my daily driver. But the remainder of the phones are running older OS.
Okay.
Which arguably isn't a bad thing considering all the bugs for Lollipop, but that's a conversation for
Another podcast.
yeah.
Yeah, basically. How about you, Joe? What are you rocking, and are they all on Lollipop?
I have 4 devices currently, including my watch. And yeah, all of my devices are running Lollipop, but that's only because, I mean, I have a Nexus and a NVIDIA Shield tablet, which got official updates, but my Note 3 is rooted, so I got, I'm running I think it's a Note 4 port right now, and it's actually pretty terrible, but it's functional, so I'm going to keep it.
Yeah. See, so that's the whole idea behind making something that an ecosystem, I should say, like Android One, where you will be getting those updates. People all around the world supposedly will be able to get their hands on the true Android experience, no matter what the price bracket might be. But like Grush, you said, we're not really looking at Android One as a real competitor to like the super low end devices that are super affordable. Let's put it that way. But I looked through some of the Android One devices that are available, and there are quite a few of them. Grushy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the actually one of the main marketing points of Android One was that its devices were going to provide features that actually a lot of high end phones don't have, like dual SIM, micro SD card slot, and various like quad core processing even. Though that's pretty much ubiquitous at this point. But I guess my question that I'm going to ask is Android One a program that is made to be successful, or is it really just Google sort of trying to extend their reach even farther?
On my end of things, like I think it is. I think it's supposed to be that thing where Google's extending their reach. The problem is that I know that it's not available in a lot of places yet. Everywhere I keep reading, it's set to launch in these other places sometime soon. But really, it's like last time I checked, it's only available in a couple of countries, like India, and I think there's 1 or 2 more.
There's India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and I think one of the models launched, or maybe 2, in the UK.
Are those
but that's about it.
Are they actually available there? Because or are they set to launch there?
So, well, Indonesia is still launching, but the others I think all have it. I believe. Don't quote me on that 100%, but I believe.
Well, I know that one of the main markets that it was supposed to come out in was like say India. And
yeah, and India does have. I think they only have like a couple though, right?
Exactly. And one of the reasons why we're talking about it is because a recent story came out that Android One is supposed to come out in Indonesia very soon. And on top of all of that, the other one, the rumored, not rumored, but like the small leak, I should say, is that these devices are the first ones to get an update to Lollipop to 5.1, which was why Android One was all of a sudden thrust back into the limelight a little bit, because, well, everyone's kind of following the Lollipop train right now.
Oh, yeah.
But this is the thing, though. The sales numbers haven't really been all that great. What is it? I'm questioning. It's not necessarily a question for the panel, but I'm just sort of questioning whether or not Google knew what the strategy was supposed to be for Android One. And, especially in developing markets, developing countries where you should be able to sort of get a really big foot in the door with affordable phones. If they're not selling very well, could that possibly be because we have enough other phones on the market that are affordable anyway?
Well, like these things take time to, to develop. I mean, I'm sure that, Android One was something that was in development in Google's, brain machine or whatever. They're brainstorming it for a couple of years. And, when you look at 2013, there weren't a lot of super cheap smartphones. I think like the Moto X hadn't come out yet. The Moto G hadn't come out yet. There wasn't a whole lot going on in the in the mid range and low range phones. Outside of having phones that had super old operating systems that never got updated. So like, hey, let's do this thing Android One. And then by the time they came out with it, now we have the Moto X, the OnePlus One, the Moto G, and all these other super affordable phones. Like, essentially, everybody beat Google to the punch here. And I think that's it's not the whole reason, obviously, but I think that it's at least a little bit part of it is that, they're already, low cost phones that are getting updates pretty frequently. And, so what's the point of having Android One if these other phones exist?
Well, I mean, the question that comes to mind, how low is low enough then when it comes to the price? Because we're talking about phones like you mentioned the OnePlus One, the Moto X, even the Moto G. Let's put the Moto G in that mix, which are still, let's say, at best, sub $200 phones. If price really does matter to people, let's say in developing markets, then you know what I mean? Like, Grush, go ahead.
Well, we have to realize, to us, it's like, we don't see a lot. Like, if we look at a phone, we're like, oh, that's 150, that's 200, that's 250. To us, they're all pretty close to the same price. But you got to realize that some of these countries are only making like 80 or 90 bucks a month, and so when you're making that little bit of money, and obviously I might be wrong on the number, but I've heard that quoted before for certain parts of Asia. Anyway, when you're making, sub $100 a month, you bet your butt that, I'm trying not to cuss. $55. There's phones that go as low as $55. $55 to $100 doesn't seem like a big deal to us, but they are for them. That's a huge deal, and I could understand that if I was only, and so I think to people in the Western markets, we're like, oh, there's not a huge difference between, a phone that's 180 and a phone that's 200. But if you were making a lot less, I think that $20 would make a huge difference to you,
Yeah, I do agree with that. And, this is a particular system that Google put out, Android One, that might kind of go over the heads of a lot of people in the West, which is kind of the reason why I was excited to talk about it. Feisty, do you like your thoughts on Android One? Do you think that there's a reason why Android One is not really catching on? Is it really just a time game, or did Google get swooped on the whole idea of making really affordable phones?
Well, exactly what you say is part of it, no doubt. By all means, there's other phones out there, other phone makers that are doing the same kind of thing. Now, I've never had the chance to touch one of these phones. I wonder if, in this case, inexpensive means cheap. And certainly that's a debate for any phone from any maker, but that's one of my concerns where, if they're all, so to speak, cheap devices, then maybe that $20 makes that huge difference. But what I really think it comes down to is availability. Even here in the Western market, when the Nexus line of devices started launching, you couldn't go into the Verizon, the AT&T store and pick out a Nexus device. You had to know what you were looking for, go to the Google Play Store. If Android One was in every store at every carrier, I think it might be a little bit better off.
And now that brings me to another idea. I did think about that maybe the e-commerce channel for Android One might be what might be hindering it, because now, far be it for me to say that I know how carriers operate in places like Indonesia or India, but I would imagine, having been to that side of the world at least, that the smartphone has become rather ubiquitous, and there's so much choice in the market now that it does come down to availability. I do agree with you on that. But if an Android One phone is supposed to be, let's say, because I'm looking at the website right now. Now, one comment I do want to make is that the Android One website, android.com/one, if the program is supposed to be geared towards developing countries, the website sure doesn't make it look like it's supposed to be. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at the website, but it's incredibly colorful, and there are all these pictures on the website that show people using these particular phones in places where you could probably afford something more. And I don't know, just kind of irked me a little bit. But I will say this: the first time that the day that Android One was announced, obviously it was at Google I/O this past June. I was super excited for it. I thought that it was a great way of consolidating Yeah, I thought it was a great way of consolidating what's supposed to be a market that everyone in the world. It's almost like the internet now. You know, the internet is almost like a right for people to have. It's becoming that ubiquitous, and if smartphones are going to be the main way that people use it, which it is in places in the East, then this is a great way to have an entry point for it. But it's a little disheartening to hear that it's not really going in that route. Grushy, when it was announced, what were you looking forward to in terms of Android One? Did you really think it was going to live up to its promise?
I really did, and I felt that the idea was great. I still feel the idea is great, and I don't think it's dead. I think we're talking about like it's dead, and I don't think it is. The problem is that there was big ambitions with the idea of bringing it, but it hasn't lived up to it. I think there's a few reasons that like we haven't touched on. For one thing, now I'm just speaking from the few I've seen, but let's take, for instance, in India, there's the Carbon Sparkle 5, I think it's called, and the Micromax Canvas A1, and then there's the Spice Dream. I can't remember exactly what it is. Anyway, I
remember the Spice one. Yeah,
yeah. There's 3 phones there that I just mentioned. They all have 4.5-inch displays with 854 by 480 resolution. They all have the same exact 1.3 gigahertz quad-core MediaTek chip. They all have 1 gigabyte of RAM. They all have the same storage. Everything is the exact same. They're boring. Even the aesthetics are pretty much right on with one another. And so, hell, if I have 3 devices that look the same, and then I have something like a Xiaomi, or I have even the Micromaxes that are not from this line, yeah, I'm going to go with something else because these are boring. It's stock Android, and I'm a stock Android advocate, but, there's nothing that defines these phones as separate other than their brand. So if you're a fan of Carbone or you're a fan of Micromax, but that's about it. There's no difference. And I think that's part of the failing, is that I don't think the Android One phones we've seen are worth getting excited about for customers. And then the fact that Lollipop took so long doesn't help, because that's supposed to be the big draw, is that, hey, these are similar price to what you can get here, but they also have the newest version of Android. Well, no, they don't, because Lollipop's now 7 months old and it's not here. And so I feel like I still think that Android One is a great concept. I just feel like they run into some hiccups, but I do believe Google can still turn it around, and I think Android One can still be a big program.
Do you think?
Can I disagree with you just a little bit?
Sure, by all means.
Perfect. Now the concept, I like it, but I don't think it's dead on. Now, how I remember the Google I/O was basically they were on stage. They said, we're going to give the manufacturers a blueprint for a device, which is pretty much why we have the exact same devices for each one, because they're just following Google's blueprint. Now, that being said, that says to me that Google's blueprint, Google's overall overview of this project is a little bit off. And I like it, and I think it can go places, but right now I think it's a little bit off.
And I don't disagree with you, actually. I said that I think there's potential, and I still do. But yeah, definitely. Now, that said, they gave a blueprint, but they gave specifics. They said, hey, you can use this, you can use that. It's not like you have to use the exact same chip. They gave a range that they wanted to get within a price range, but everyone just decided to do the same cookie cutter approach. And so that's not totally Google's fault, but yeah, I think that the program was a little limited in the way it was approached. And I have a theory. I could be totally wrong, but I think that the fact that we're seeing 5.1 arrive on on Android One speaks to the fact that, and even like Feist, I know you mentioned elsewhere when we've had conversations and stuff. Anyway, you've mentioned that you felt that Lollipop's a little bit sluggish. Let's put it that way. And I think that was part of the reason. Is I think that in its current form, with its bugs and with everything, that they just felt it couldn't be on there. And so they needed to make some changes. And I think that's why we're seeing 5.1 launch with Android One, is that it's hopefully addressed some of those issues. Like I said, that's just speculating, but
Adding to that speculation, I wonder if 5.1 is sadly an offshoot, a forking of Android, where 5.0.2 and that stream will continue on for, the bigger the flagship devices, and the 5.1 will go to the lower end, or lower, smaller hardware devices.
There's already talk about testing of the 5.1 update on Nexus, so I don't think that's the case. I don't think Google would do that anymore. They did that back in the day with like Honeycomb, but I think we're past that.
Honeycomb.
I hope so.
Has anyone
That's
used
gross.
Honeycomb? Yeah, it was interesting.
I still have a functioning Logitech review that runs Honeycomb.
Whoa,
Anyway.
Logitech review. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we mentioned Honeycomb, and we can immediately what comes to mind are the different devices that used to rock that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm on a Android like 1.6 right now using the G1 for my flashback series. I don't know. I thought that Lollipop, knowing that it's supposed to be compatible with, let's say, lower end devices,
Supposed to.
it's supposed to. Maybe it was wishful thinking for me to think that I could easily put that on a classic Android phone. No, I'm using a phone right now that could be considered what today's Android One phones are, and it still has the Android market. Like I can't even use the freaking Play Store to get the essential applications that I need. What if nostalgia is not a very big thing in the tech world? If it's always about the cutting edge. It's not really about nostalgia and going back to your roots. But that's one of the caveats I have when it comes to Lollipop is that it probably should have had it available for, if there are versions of it that would work on any device pretty much, then maybe make that reach like just so far that even classic phones could be used. So we're mentioning a lot here that Lollipop has some issues, and maybe that's something that we will actually dive into in a little bit here. I actually think I want to sort of hash that out. I want to hear what your guys' thoughts are on that. But a thought came to mind. Could it be that these companies are creating the cookie cutter devices for Android One, or even the really cheap ones that they're making that are not part of Android One? Could it be that they're making the cookie cutter versions and just sort of they're sort of focusing on the bottom line, because there's probably not a huge amount of profit to be had in a phone that, let's say, is only about $100. Am I out of line by saying that?
No, I mean they are in fact businesses and do in fact care about the bottom line. So I mean you're probably right on there, at least to an extent. But I'm sure that there's probably something that's been worked out between these companies and Google, where it's like, you guys build the hardware, we'll do the software, and if something goes wrong, I don't think that Google's like paying these these companies for every phone that they make, but I'm sure that there's something there to help encourage them to continue to do stuff like this. But yeah, no, I think the biggest problem, like Feisty said earlier, is distribution. Really, I mean, you can't find these things anywhere except for on the internet, right? Like these aren't being sold in stores and in carrier stores and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I don't believe so, but I don't know much about that aspect, to be honest.
Well, the thing is I've spoken to a lot of Indian people who use Android, and a lot of them don't have things like credit cards and can't make purchases online, and because they use that, and this is a whole different conversation, but I'm going to bring it up for just a moment. But that's the reason that they give for pirating applications. Like when the Monument Valley numbers came out, they were like, "Oh yeah, no, we pirated the shit out of this because we don't have credit cards to pay for it. We're not allowed to buy it, so but we still want to play anyway." So, a part of me thinks like, if the main way of distribution is online, and a lot of people in those countries don't have credit cards, don't have debit cards, and don't have the internet, then how are they supposed to order these damn things?
Yeah, it's an incredible point. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the people in, let's say, Eastern developing countries, their access to the internet is primarily through a smartphone. So if you already own a smartphone to get to the internet, how are you going to get in? Why would you get Android One? Because you pretty much got your foot in the door already. Obviously there's going to be a huge socioeconomic discussion that could be had when it comes to this, which is why I brought up the fact that the Android One website looks like, I mean, come on, there's this picture of this Asian dude walking through what looks like a farmer's market. And he's dressed to the nines. He looks like a well-dressed person, and right next to it is a dude in like what I can only say is like a Ralph Lauren polo shirt. I'm like, what is going on here? Like, I think that one of the failures of Android One is the fact that it doesn't necessarily realize that you can't really use money to market something that's supposed to help people who have no money. And, if this is supposed to be some sort of a grassroots, well, maybe not grassroots because we're talking about Google here, but if this is supposed to be something that developing countries are supposed to take advantage of, it doesn't really seem like it from from the advertisements, from the marketing, not in the slightest.
You know what would be a really great idea? And I can't remember which, we talked about it on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago maybe. But what was
Those are
the
the only
company?
weeks we had.
Yeah, mea culpa. But who was the company that had the like the refrigerator trucks full of technology and they're driving around and selling it to people?
That's something that they're getting ready to do with. They haven't done it yet, but they're getting ready to do that with Project Aura.
That's the kind of stuff they need to be doing with Android One. They need to be, putting an ice cream truck full of Android One devices and literally drive it up and down the street and try to sell it to people like ice cream. Because like Josh said, it's supposed to be a grassroots movement. And how are you going to get to a grassroots movement if they don't have the internet yet? You have to bring it to them.
Yeah.
In order for them to buy it. And the people that already have credit cards and already have enough money to buy a smartphone and have the internet, those people are going to go the extra $100 and get something a little bit better than this. Let's face it. That's what they're doing already.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to go to the people. I have this image in my head of Google basically saying, okay, we created this, like you guys said, Feisty and Grushy, a blueprint for you guys to create these phones. Go have at it. And then they wash their hands of the whole thing. That's, it's almost upsetting me just a little bit, because I love the democratization of information, of the internet. And I love that, at Google I.O., I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I thought, oh man, Google is not the evil company that sometimes we say they are. They really are trying to help people. And now...
Sorry.
Exactly, right?
That we sometimes say that. I'm sorry, that cracked me up.
Like, to think that this was a focus. This was actually a pretty substantial part of Google I.O. To think that this was a big part of it and that it had a focus, it just kind of irks me a little bit that, first of all, the way that they're presenting it, if this is going to be the main way of finding it, android.com/one, I'm not really convinced. And even then, like we're saying, the sales seem to be in the down portion right now. And that's just a little bit saddening, I guess, to me. But I'm talking existentially here. I'm not focusing on the devices.
I've been sitting here trying to do some Google searching. It does look like they have done some relationships with the carriers in India and stuff. So there's a little. It's primarily online from what I can see, like Flipkart and Amazon and stuff. But they do have some carrier relationships. So they've tried to do it a little. But it's a lot. It's a different landscape. I don't know. I don't feel like Google's necessarily let down the program. I just feel it's been off to a rough start. I'm not giving up on it yet. I think it still has a lot of potential. And Google sometimes is that way. It takes them a little while to get into their groove with stuff, So I don't think it's necessarily down and out by any means yet.
Yeah, no, Google's always about these long form things. You guys remember, Google Play Music, it started out, it wasn't really all that great. You could just upload some songs and stream them. And now you can go online, buy a bunch of songs and have them not stream because it's freaking broken still. So, but they're still working on it. And that's the important thing.
Yeah. I suppose on some level, though, it's just that's the way Google operates, right? We are all basically beta testers.
I say you're perpetually in beta stage. Yep, that's how all their products are, for better or worse. I in some ways I don't mind that, but with a program like this, I agree with you. It's a little upsetting to think that it had the potential to be a big deal, but then again, you're seeing all these other companies that are still producing good handsets, so I think that the goal is still being reached, even if Android One's not the one doing it.
Yeah.
So
Android
who do you
One
guys
not being
think
the one.
is responsible for making this a success? Is this Google's project? Do they own this? Or is it up to the manufacturers, or they just have a guideline to follow?
I think it's supposed to be pretty 50-50 was the idea, but...
Well, we just say manufacturers and Google, but we also have carriers involved.
Oh, yeah, and that always makes things more complicated.
Yes.
Yeah. Retailers, distribution, yeah.
Well, a
lot there.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just said there's a lot there to consider. Lots of logistics.
There's so many channels to go through, and I suppose, giving them the benefit of the doubt, giving a multi-billion-dollar company the benefit of the doubt, they can only market so much. Below those ridiculous pictures I was talking about earlier are, broken apart versions of an example of an Android One phone that has all of these features that supposedly are going to be really great for people who can afford it, or the fact that it should be affordable for a lot of people. So looking at some of these other devices that are also affordable. Now, obviously, we did mention already earlier that how low is low enough. Obviously, for us, something like that's $200, or even the OnePlus One, which is $349, constitutes affordable to us. But if Android One is having here front and rear cameras, quad-core processor, micro SD card, all-day battery, well, okay, everyone says that, but
LOL.
yeah, dual SIM cards. Well, what would constitute an affordable phone to you? Let's look at this from another perspective. What if Android One is a way of telling people that you don't have to compromise for the features that should become standard for a phone? Feisty, you're using a Moto G. Would you say the Moto G is the bare minimum when it comes to what could be an affordable phone that has the features you want?
Sort of, yes. Now, I've got my gripes with this phone, and let's start off with the processor. I mean, the Snapdragon 400. I spent $200 to get this Google Play Edition version, and getting a Snapdragon 400 device right now can be done for $30 out there. So I don't know. I'm not sure where the processor market is at right now. To me, there's no solid successor. There's the Snapdragon 410, but we're not really seeing it out there yet. So I'm not sure. I think it really comes down to that, where anything below a Snapdragon 400, the Snapdragon 200 devices and whatnot.
Oh dear.
I don't think they have enough juice. Even now, this Moto G, it's recently updated to 5.0.2, and I notice the slowdown. I am now feeling that the 400 is not strong enough.
Snapdragon 400, we've seen in a few devices. I'm doing my own little research on the side just to sort of bolster this. It looks to me here that Android One phones from the various partnerships that they have primarily use MediaTek processors.
Yeah, there's been talks about using there's partnerships with Qualcomm. It just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see the second generation Android One phones are going to be a lot different than the first gen. I think getting it out there, they started with pretty base phones, and I'm hoping that the second gen will really see what the program's made of.
Would they call that Android 2?
I think it'll just still be Android 1, but
it's Google. They're gonna call it Android 1.1.
Yep.
Coming soon.
Now I do have to say, we're mentioning bare minimum in specs, and the Snapdragon 400 on KitKat does great. Lollipop's supposed to be even better for lower end, and so I really do sincerely think bugs are in the way, and I think that 5.1 and later updates will fix that. But anyway, talking about Snapdragon 400, Feist says almost $200, but is that the bare minimum for a Snapdragon 400 device? Absolutely not. For instance, Xiaomi's how do they pronounce it? Is it Redmi or Redmi? Is that the line?
Yeah, usually it's me if it's MI. Yeah, so
Redmi. The Redmi 1S, for example, is the equivalent of $100 in India, and it has a Snapdragon 400 in it. It has 1 gigabyte of RAM. It has an 8 megapixel camera. It has I believe it has 8 gigabytes of storage. Let me see. I'm gonna look it up. 8 gigabytes of storage. And it's $100, and so there's companies that can do it, that can produce a high-end device, and I think that probably speaks to why Android One isn't doing well. Is they're selling a MediaTek device when Xiaomi and stuff is able to produce a device with a Snapdragon 400 for the same price. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. I'm going to go with the Xiaomi.
Yeah, and speaking from experience, MediaTek processors they're not terrible by any means, but they just don't kind of hold a candle to Snapdragons. And even then, if we're talking about entry-level MediaTek phones, processors, I should say. Oh my goodness! Who's to know exactly what kind of experience you're going to get on that?
Now, I mean, with the sorry, not to cut in, but with
no.
I do want to say with the Redmi, the Redmi 1S, you are getting Jelly Bean, and that was supposed to be the point of Android One, is you're getting the newest version. Whereas with obviously it's running the MIUI or whatever they call it, but it's based on Jelly Bean, and so you're not getting the newest version of Android, and that was the point of Android One. But to me, if I was low on money, and I was in one of these countries, and you gave me two phones that were $100, one had a crappy, not to be mean, but a crappy MediaTek processor, but it had KitKat, and it was about ready to upgrade to Lollipop, and the other has Jelly Bean, but it is running a faster processor, it's more optimized, it has a better camera. You know what? I'm not going to be petty about the Android version. I'm going to go with the device that gives me more power for the money, you know?
Well, I love that you said that, because I expected our conversation to move into, the scales. Which one are you going to pick if you had an Android One phone or something else that had a little bit more to offer? Feisty, what would that be for you? Are you a software monger in the sense that you really want the latest one, or will the actual specs, let's say, really sway you in the other direction?
Not to say that I don't want the latest OS, but I definitely look at the hardware before the software. Now, software, again, plays a part, and it always should, but, hardware theoretically can be upgraded with new software. These devices, it's not like an old PC where you can rip it out, put in new RAM. You get what you pay for, and that's it. There's no upgrading these phones, so hardware is always what I look at.
Enter Project Aura.
Well, yes, that too.
Our podcast will always go full circle somehow. How about you, Joe?
Goodness gracious, this is such a complicated answer. Because, we were talking about the minimum specs a minute ago, and, everyone was like, oh yeah, I can deal with, 1 gigabyte of RAM and Snapdragon 400. I'm looking at my current apps usage, and I just flashed this ROM today. Right, so I just reinstalled everything and all that. It's a totally clean install. And I'm using 715 megabytes of RAM just for apps. That's not including my system. Including the system, it's 1.2 gigabytes. So a 1 gigabyte phone with the apps that I run is like impossible for me. I would never be able to use it because everything would be slowing down because of lack of RAM. So for me personally, like my minimum is 2 gigabytes. And, if I'm looking at something that's, lots and lots of updates or, hardware, I'm going hardware, because hardware can always, like Feisty said, you can always upgrade hardware with better software eventually, as long as you buy it from a company that doesn't suck. HTC. Just kidding. I love it. I'm buying an HTC One M9. I'm allowed to say mean things right now. But, it's a complicated subject. I don't really have my thoughts totally in line yet for this one, so I'm gonna shut up now.
Well, that's the thing. This is the reason why, at least maybe Grushy and I were hoping that Android One would be able to consolidate these issues, and it doesn't seem like that it so far has been able to. Who knows what would happen 2 years down the road if all of these companies who are always looking for the bottom line will actually allow themselves to go below that line and say, okay, let's make a phone that is not only got the bare minimums, and we mean bare minimums like 2 gigabytes of RAM, like Joe was saying, but we're also going to make it affordable. It seemed up until Android One happened, and maybe even until now, if we're talking about Android One not necessarily succeeding, it was sort of a pipe dream. And for people in developing countries, I'm Filipino, and I have so many family members and people that I know in the Philippines who are stuck with particular types of phones. And, even my father, who goes back to the Philippines every now and then, he brings back phones. He pretty much brings back my hand-me-downs to give to people in the Philippines so they can have a more upgraded experience, because otherwise they wouldn't have anything. The Philippines is still called the texting capital of the world because that's what everyone can do. Not everyone has a smartphone. Not everyone can get on WhatsApp or whatever the hot messaging app is nowadays. But, that's why this topic sort of hits home for me, is because I want to see the democratization and the overall availability of a program like this, because I know firsthand, from personal experience, what it can be like for people who have that trouble to get a phone like this. So owing it to maybe a little bit of greed from some companies, or maybe Google's reach is not as far as we thought. The Android One program is something that we have to still wait and see where it's going to go. I wanted to actually, Grushy, can I put you on the spot right now? A little bit,
I guess. We'll see how it goes.
I think mostly from you during our conversation now, we've heard quite a little bit of shade against Lollipop. Mm-hmm. Like, can we get a small Grushy rant on like what's wrong with Lollipop? Because
well,
grab a seat, kids.
I don't want to be. Sorry.
I would say I really honestly thought you were about to do oh hell no. That's what it sounded like you were about to go for.
No, I'm just trying to kind of gather my thoughts here. I have Lollipop on my Nexus 5, and on my Nexus 7, and on my Nexus 4, and on my Nexus 10. I have a lot of Nexuses. Anyway, I have it. and I'm considering going back to KitKat.
Whoa.
I think Lollipop has a lot of potential. People are probably getting ready to bring out their pitchforks right now. They're going to be listening to this. I'm a Google fan. I think Lollipop has a lot of potential. I just think it's very buggy. Whether or not that's justified, since it's such a big jump, is probably another conversation. But ultimately, it's just that I kind of feel like with the fact that we this time around had a testing phase where we were able to try out the phone and report our bugs. I downloaded it right away on my Nexus 5, back before it was just, Android L. I felt like we were going to get a version of Android that was pretty stable from the get-go, and it hasn't been. The battery life promises on my device, at least, hasn't been what it's supposed to be. I run into a lot of random glitches and shutdowns, and I'm not going to say that I represent everyone, and you might have the Lollipop device right now and be like, I've had no problems at all, and that's fine. Just my own personal experience, I just feel like there was a lot of bugs. There's been battery draining bugs, there's been Wi-Fi bugs, there's been all sorts of... And it just feels like we should have had these figured out before now. Eventually, when it gets all solved in Android 5.1, whatever is there, I'll probably be very happy with Lollipop. I like material design. It's a big change. It's bright. It's colorful. I'm cool with it. And there's a lot of good changes with Lollipop. But at the same time, if you are still on KitKat, don't necessarily be in a rush to get Lollipop. Eventually, it's going to be awesome. But don't be like, I wish I had Lollipop, because you may not necessarily be thrilled with what you get. I mean, there's still a lot that's not there. I think Lollipop has a lot of potential, but it's not polished to where I want it to be. And yeah, I know there's people who are probably mad at me right now for saying it, but personally, I just feel like Lollipop has a lot of potential, but it hasn't all reached it. And what do you guys think? I mean, do you feel like Lollipop is everything it's cracked up to be right now? I have full confidence, before I hand it over, I have full confidence Google will get it there. I absolutely have confidence that Google will get it there. I don't think Lollipop will be a disaster. It's not going to be the Windows 8 of the Android world. I like
Windows
Android
8
8.
was actually fairly stable,
but everyone
though.
hates Android 8. I mean, Windows 8.
Android 8.
Android 8.
Holy crap!
I'm in the future now. No, everyone hates Windows 8, except for a small subsection of people. Yeah, I had no problem with it either, Joe. But I don't think Lollipop will be remembered as a bad version, is what I'm saying. But right now, it's not quite there, in my opinion. What do you guys think? Is Lollipop what you think it should be right now?
I think... No, first of all, you're absolutely right. Lollipop is buggy as all hell. Like, I have 3 devices with Lollipop, and the one that's rooted, the one with the broken warranty, running a ROM from a phone that was released a year later, is the most stable device in my possession right now. Like, my NVIDIA Shield tablet's a great device, but it has audio bugs that keep, like, you'll be listening to something, you'll be like, oh, hello there, and then keep going. My Nexus 5 sometimes connects to my Wi-Fi and sometimes it doesn't. It's really up to it. Sometimes I sweet talk it a little bit, like, oh, come on, baby, please, just for a little bit. I really need to download this app to test it. I'll buy you some flowers and stuff. I'd never buy it flowers, which is probably why it's mad at me. But
all of our listeners have a very colorful idea of what Joe does with his phones.
you don't want to know. It gets crazy.
I woo them. I woo them to try to get them to work, and they don't work sometimes. And it's, like Grushy, I've considered going back to KitKat on a number of occasions, but given the nature of my work, I pretty much got to stay with the latest, because that's what people want to see. But no, it speaks to it. Thanks a lot, Grushy. Yeah, thanks for that chat there. Totally derailed me. Garlic bread and phones, my 2 favorite things. Anyways, we were talking about it earlier, the always in beta thing that pretty much everybody who's a Google fan goes through. Everything is always in beta all the time, and we see that effect on more than just Android. You have a Chrome browser that eats up a bunch of RAM. You have Google Play Music, which doesn't stream sometimes. And now it's getting to the point where they're so rapid fire with these releases every single year with Android I think it's just starting to catch up to them a little bit. It's getting harder and harder for them to rebase and redo all of this stuff and come out with an operating system that has no bugs. Because you look at Windows 10. When did Windows 8 come out? Like 2-3 years ago?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and Windows 10 hasn't even come out till tonight. That's 4 years. 4 years that Windows has to work out the bugs and get this stuff in order before it gets released. And Google is due out for another version of Android in freaking 9 months. Like, are you kidding me? Like, it's starting to get to a point where I think, Google and people in general just need to calm the hell down a little bit. And just the way I look at software is, does it work? Great. It's doing what it's supposed to do. Why are you in a rush to change that? And it feels like, it's getting to a point where I don't even want to update anymore. I feel like I'm being forced to update because otherwise I'm going to get left in the dust. And that's my little micro rant on Android and just upgrading too quickly. I think that's the real problem. Is just they had 365 days to do it and they needed more time.
Okay. The reason why I love that you guys are going at length about this is because I'm gonna bring it around in a second, but I want to hear from Feisty thoughts on Lollipop, and do you have any problems with it? The way that it seems Joe and Grushy have, just some not caveats, but some reservations about it.
I hate it. I'm sorry.
Hell no.
Lollipop's awesome. Eventually,
Lollipop. I have found a few minor things, but in the UI in the front end, I would specifically call out this priority mode on the audio settings. It's an awesome option, but why is it the default? It should be a back-end thing that you can enable and then just allow us to hit the power or the volume rocker and turn the phone down and off. But anyways,
that's being fixed in 5.1, by the way. Just throwing that out there.
Excellent.
Too little, too late.
You can always wait for Thursday, my Android customization series, and I cover these things and how to get by it.
Plug.
Sorry. Honestly, though, the biggest thing for me, I think, is art, the Android runtime. The thing that has been bothering me with the phone, specifically the Moto G. I got a Nexus 9 here. It's been great. The Moto G, I'm finding that its RAM utilization is a blessing and a curse all at the same time. Yes, it's loading apps faster. However, I'm glad you guys brought up Windows. It's doing the old Microsoft thing where it's just slowly bleeding and sucking up more and more RAM. Once every week and a half or so, I have to restart the device. I hate having to restart my devices.
Oh, boo-hoo. That few seconds just ends your world, huh?
See, it goes beyond that. I am a huge helium backup user, or carbon, whatever you want, if you remember it from the old days.
Yeah, carbon.
So when you hook this guy up to your PC, you get everything all set up, you can run your backups and restores. I don't like to have to hook it up all the time. Again, that 30 seconds, right? But every time I restart the device, I have to reconfigure these things and redo all this stuff, and I didn't have to before, is my point. I did not have to on KitKat. I do
Feisty?
have to now.
For some clarification, do you mean like reboot the device, or do you mean like total like wipe the device, factory reset?
Just reboot, power toggle.
Oh, okay.
Which again, it's a minor thing, but and that is my largest complaint with Lollipop. So I guess in the long run, we're doing pretty good. It's okay if that's the complaint.
Okay. Well, personally speaking, I should keep my answer on this actually too, is I really enjoy Lollipop. I think the aesthetic upgrade was something that was very truly needed. As much as I love Holo, material design is far and beyond a better way of presenting Android.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm also one of those people, I've said this a couple times before, and I haven't gotten much reaction to it yet, but I'm also one of those people who, the best way for me to describe it is, I'm a very tolerant technology user. If there are some minor issues, I'll say minor because that's my scope, if there's some issues with the way that I'm using my version of Android, I will find a way around it and use up that like 2 hours to figure out, is there a way for me to optimize it better, or is there something I can do to alleviate it, blah, blah, blah. So really, when I run into any like little things, I call Joe what did I I call you that other time? A stutter Nazi, I think is what it was. That kind of stuff doesn't really bother me. Where if I see a little bit of a hiccup here and there, the only real problem that I've had on my Moto X, at least with Lollipop, is that the calendar app, which I don't use, keeps force closing on me. And
YouTube
even
force closes on me all the time, by the way. That's probably
while you're using it.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Google Plus reboots my phone for me.
Yeah, that happened to me too. That happened to me too on Lollipop. Mm-hmm.
See, I by far do not get these types of problems on the phones that I use, and that the worst thing that's happened to me on Lollipop is that the calendar just every now and then, no matter what I'm doing, because I almost never touch the calendar app, it will just pop up a little window that says "Sorry, calendar has stopped" or whatever it says on there. That's really all I get, and I can't really begin to even tell you why that is the case with me. But I actually have had a very great time with Lollipop.
That's kind of why I mentioned that. I'm not representing everyone because there's a lot of people who probably have none of these issues that Joe and myself have ran into, and that's great. And honestly, if I reloaded Lollipop, who knows? Maybe we better next time around. You know, sometimes just stuff happens while you're installing, and just that has happened to me before where I've reloaded and it's been just fine. And I've thought about doing that to see, And so I know with Windows and whatnot, in any operating system, sometimes just stuff goes wrong. And sometimes just, starting it all over again is enough. Reloading everything from scratch is enough. And, maybe I should consider that before I get too angry. But, I've had a volume issue where now my Nexus 5 isn't as high. And who knows, maybe my speaker is going out. But it coincided with the update to 5.0.2. So I'm guessing it's a software issue. And I just haven't got around to reloading to see. And so that was probably the main reason why I'm annoyed about Lollipop is that I actually still use the phone, unlike most people, to call people, like my mom and people like that, family members. And so, yes, I call my mom. She lives 3 hours away. I have to call her every once in a while, see how she's doing. Anyway, and so when I'm making a call, I can barely hear her. So now I have to use a Bluetooth headset and look like a D-bag all the time, running around with the Bluetooth. And so, which I hate Bluetooths. And so I guess that's the reason why I'm annoyed by it. It's just little stuff like that. And like I said, I have nothing against Lollipop's design. I have nothing against all the new APIs. I think Lollipop is the biggest change that Android's seen since Ice Cream Sandwich. Absolutely. But, then again, when Ice Cream Sandwich showed up, there was a lot of issues too, wasn't there? So maybe that's just growing pain.
Yeah, probably growing pains and whatnot. I agree with you though, Grushy. If I had that problem where I had to use a Bluetooth headset all the time, which I actually do use, I don't use the one earpiece ones, but I use full-on headphones that have a microphone on them. If I had to use that just to talk to somebody, I'd probably be pissed off too. So I don't blame you at all for that.
Yeah, and like I said, maybe my phone, but I guess that would be a whole nother issue if my Nexus 5, which is it's not even, I didn't get it right when it came out, so it's only about a year old. And so maybe my Nexus 5, speaker's going out, but if that's the issue, then I'm even more annoyed.
Yeah, perhaps so. Okay, well, here's where I wanted to bring it full circle then. There are problems with Lollipop, and not the least of which is the fact that it's not necessarily available for even lower-end phones right now, if we're talking about Android One. But bringing it back to the whole Android One thing, if these are problems we're having with Lollipop on higher-end phones, is it justified for Android One to use it as a main marketing strategy?
That's a really good question. I don't know.
If it's not a sustainable or even stable, let's say stable operating system, and it's supposed to be their platform to create a democratization of smartphones, is that really something they should be doing if these are the problems we're having in the high-end market? Yeah.
Well, like Grushy said, Lollipop has a lot of potential, and they are gonna fix all of these stupid little problems eventually. I got a feeling that it's gonna be like Jelly Bean, where it's gonna be, already 5.1 is already Lollipop, so we're probably gonna have a 5.2 Lollipop. What? Did I drop out there for a sec?
No, I thought I heard a noise over from Grushy also, but it's okay.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
but no. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, bud.
I said I'm sorry. Maybe I dropped out. Just all of a sudden it went quiet.
Oh no, we're fine, guys. But yeah, go for it.
Technical difficulties. I totally lost my train of thought, guys. I'm sorry.
Potential with Android One and potential with Lollipop. That is. It'll be more like Jelly Bean.
Google is going to fix these problems, and when they do fix these problems, it's going to be fine. You know, it'll work better.
yeah.
I actually noticed I have a Nexus 7 2012, or I did. I actually gave it to my roommate's girlfriend's kid because yeah, that's right. That's the new demographic for tablets that barely work, kids. Oh man, that sounded bad. I'm sorry. Anyways, but I had Android 5.0.0 on it, and it was garbage. Like, the Nexus 7 2012 was totally unusable, period. Like, I couldn't even open and read a comic book. Like, flipping the pages took 2 seconds, and it was just like, I wanted to destroy the thing. And then I put 5.0.2 on there, and a lot of those problems were alleviated. Not all of them, but enough of them to where I felt comfortable giving the tablet to a kid, and I know that the kid would probably still be able to enjoy it, even if I couldn't. It's just, you know, like Grushy said, it's going to be one of those things where it's going to take some time and they got to get all this fixed. I just kind of wish, you know, like, just 1 year, I'd like for Google to go, you know what, guys, we're not doing an Android release this year. We're going to do something really big next year. We want to work on it, make sure it's perfect.
No, we need new changes now, Joe. Quiet.
I know. Need the changes now. Hashtag Nexus Warriors.
Google can't necessarily be Hideo Kojima. So
I want 6.
I don't know.
I want 6.0. Where is it?
It's getting to a point where you hear these things over and over again, and it's just like, maybe it's just time to stop with the Nexus style yearly updates thing. Like, I just don't think it's working anymore.
No, you're bad.
I do think I'm honestly these are going to be my favorite moments on the podcast is when you know, one of the golden rules of podcasting is there should never be any dead air, but I actually would love it. I would love it every time I bring up a question and you guys are like, oh, I gotta think about that for a second. Because I think those are the questions that we hope to be able to answer, you know, that we get answers to, because that's the whole premise behind Android One, is the fact that you'll get the latest operating system. But we've heard from 3 people here, or actually 2, Grushy and Joe, that you're thinking of going back to KitKat.
Oh no, he is. No, I'm sticking with it all the way to the end.
I've had those moments. I'm gonna probably reload Lollipop on my Nexus 5 and see how it goes. And if it's still
okay,
but I think we'll get there. I think 5.1 will be a solution, hopefully. But that brings me, you know, you're talking about, you know, Android One and whether or not Lollipop should be on there. I think that's why it's not. You know, I have to give Google credit there. I think that they realized that it was going to be a subpar experience out of the box, and so they waited. And I think that's why it's launching in Indonesia with 5.1, and that's why Android One is going to be the first to see 5.1. Is because I think they addressed the issues, and I think that Android One will hopefully start becoming a bigger deal after this. I think that, you know, and so I have faith in Google. I do. I mean, we probably sound like the most anti-Google Android podcast ever, but no, I have absolute faith that Google will get it right. And I think that they had the hindsight to realize, you know, if we throw Lollipop on here and it's laggy and it's buggy on a low-end phone, people are going to hate Android One. So we're better off to take a little flack for waiting. You know? That's
so funny. If it works on our crappiest phones, then it's got to work on the better phones.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking. Is if they optimized it for Android One, if Android 5.1 is optimized for Android One, then theoretically it should work fine for everything else. Because if it can work well on low end, it should work well on everything else with a little bit of work.
Mm-hmm. Unless it has a Tegra 3 in it, because then it won't work at all. Trust me.
Boo. How about you, Feisty? Do you think that, you know, owing to all of the things we said about Lollipop, is it justified that Android One is using it as one of its main marketing strategies?
Before I answer that, I have to thank Joe for bringing up the Nexus 7. I'm sticking with mine, man. I'm going to try and get this to work. Now, I will say that the Lollipop update on this old 2012 Nexus 7... yes, changing apps is a terrible experience, but once I'm inside an app, especially a heavier game, it is running much better. So your was it your roommate's sister, girlfriend's niece?
No,
a good time with the
or something.
Yeah. So going to the question. Sorry. There is always that expectation when you upgrade an OS that it's going to be an improvement to the system, to your device. So certainly waiting and holding off for this, proper 5.1. I say proper. We'll see what happens. Was a great move. That's absolutely what they needed to do. So Android One, I'm with the other guys. Absolutely, I have high hopes for the program. I think it has a future, assuming they can, looping back to the beginning, get their marketing and distribution figured out.
Okay. Yeah, I have hopes for it. I'm kind of on the fence after having been one of those people that was like, oh my God, my relatives in the Philippines are going to benefit from this so much. And then, we get this kind of news from it. That's why I was a little bit impassioned during our discussion, is because, I really want to see stuff like this succeed. I want to see developing countries develop, and, if Google was going to be at the forefront of providing smartphones to the masses who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford the experiences that we are blessed to have here in the West, then I'm all for it. So I have high hopes as well, but I wanted to explore all the issues as to why. And if Lollipop was one of them, we were going to put it to task, and I'm glad that we were able to do that. So with that, I think that we've thoroughly been able to go through this particular topic for this week's Friday Debate. Stay tuned to Android Authority for all of the best coverage and for the podcast, the Friday Debate podcast, of course. And in the background, we're having a little bit of a chat war. The Friday Debate podcast, of course, is available every Friday on all of the podcast networks, and we are discussing Android topics every week. You can follow all of us on social media, all four of us. The best place to find everybody is on Google+, using plus and, of course, our full names. But you can also find us on various other sites as well, like Twitter. And if you want to find out what those sites are and get the links to all of our social media sites, you can go to the post at androidauthority.com, on which we will have the Friday Debate podcast ready for you to listen. Some flavor in your ear. Make sure you stay tuned next week also, where we're probably going to have maybe one or two different guests on there from the Android Authority team, so you can look forward to that. But I want to give another thanks to our hosts for this week, our usual group. Thank you again for being on. As always, keep it tuned to Android Authority for all the best. Get over to our YouTube channel and drop us some likes on those videos, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, rate us on iTunes, Stitcher, all the different podcast networks, because it also ups our visibility on their particular websites. All in all, I think that should do it for this week's podcast. So we're going to try this every single week. I want you guys to join me on this one. Android Authority, Friday Debate podcast, discussing topics in Android every week. We are, of course, your source for all things Android. Are you doing that on purpose, Joe?
No, I'm just bad at timing.
He's just delayed.
All right. See you guys next week, everybody.